thank you all so much for coming this afternoon to the TeachMeet. It's all about supporting non-verbal pupils in mainstream settings. Before we get stuck in, I'll just introduce myself. My name's Rosa Bazrafshan. I've been at Twinkl for about a year and a half in innovation. Previous to that, I was in schools for 10 years supporting children with autism, ADHD, PDA, and social emotional health issues. That was across primary, secondary, and SEN settings. The bulk of it was in primary mainstream settings. Before we get on with a couple of just housekeeping slides, I would love to know what key stages you guys are supporting. So if you've got access to that little comment feature, if you don't mind just popping, whether it's early years, key stage 1, or across them all, this just means that when I give examples, practical examples, they will be relevant to the people that I'm talking to. So thank you so much. Those can keep coming in as I go through these next couple of slides. So the aims for our training will cover 4 sections, and each of the sections will explore a different learning or development theory, outline key challenges faced by non-verbal pupils in the mainstream setting, as well as offering practical solutions, strategies, and resources to hopefully mitigate some of those challenges. Our main aim is to develop understanding and knowledge of these challenges faced by non-verbal pupils, and really to equip you guys with some strategies to be able to respond more adequately to those in the setting. Throughout this training, I'll be referring to, when we refer to non-verbal pupils, we're talking about pupils who use little to no verbal communication, or those who are minimally verbal, which is using fewer than 5 to 10 intelligible words in their daily interactions. Also, while the focus of this training might not explicitly state it, the pupils we're addressing today are likely to have diagnosed or undiagnosed autism, as well as associated learning and behavioural difficulties. So, our first section, supporting sensory needs. Maslow's hierarchy of needs is a common learning theory that's used in the setting. If you would like to just raise your hand if you've heard of it before, and the hand feature, that'd be great. No worries if not. If there are some fantastic, yeah, definitely one that we've heard of before. There is some more reading on this that we've got some Twinkl resources on as well. But for now, I'll just take us through a quick summary just to refresh our minds. So developed in 1943, American psychologist Abraham Maslow outlined 5 distinct levels of human need, with the base need being physiological, things like water, food, and shelter. On top of that, safety, freedom of fear, and access to resources. Things like loving and belonging are next, with building acceptance and friendship and family. On top of that is our esteem needs, things like respect, recognition, and achievement. And lastly, self-actualization, which is where a self-perpetual, sustainable level of kind of always trying to get better and trying to push yourselves to achieve our best potential. So the hierarchy shows these base level needs such as physiological and safety needs. Now, we in education apply this theory to our daily practice when we do things like offer breakfast to a child if they've come in hungry, when we offer pastoral support to a child who's upset, because we know that we can't teach a child if their physiological and safety needs are not met. We also provide other opportunities to build bonds with peers to enhance love and belonging needs, and we constantly try and celebrate success through teacher or parent praise and reward systems to then build on that esteem needs. So we can see that it's extremely important. However, those sensory needs can really impact the overall journey the pupil takes up the hierarchy, especially for non-verbal pupils. Regular disruptions to things like sleep and rest and food intake will massively exacerbate the physiological needs of the pupil, often leading to frequent instances of overload and exhaustion, which in turn will contribute to further sensory processing difficulties. So this means that the pupil might find themselves constantly caught between meeting physiological needs and achieving a sense of safety in the setting, which massively reduces their well-being as well as their ability to engage with classroom activities and demands. So we kind of call this stuck at the base, and really imperative that we start to learn how to recognize how those sensory needs interact with the hierarchy and how we can address those in the setting to truly build and cultivate an environment that's really inclusive. So for this, observations are vital. This is our biggest tool in kind of identifying these needs and being able to first and foremost acknowledge them before addressing them. So to inform improvements, we'll often record observations on a daily basis. This could be just note-taking in exercise books, post-it notes. There are an array of observation approaches that are used, and it's up to your school and your team to kind of judge what's best for you to use. But it is up to us to also learn the language of the child. So when we're making those observations, what to look out for, things like body language, proximity, vocalization, maybe gestures, hand over hand requests. We've got a lot of language, without there being actual any verbal language, there is a lot of communication still going on, and it's up to us to kind of tune in to those types of communication styles. So we can also, what we've learned before as well is the fact that all behaviour is classed as communication. So things like hitting, screaming, kicking or biting, some of these violent, more challenging behaviours are still an effort to communicate. We can learn about things like the dysregulation and tantrum. There's a big difference between the two. We've got a lovely resource on that. And that really just addresses whether or not the child is actually ready to learn or not. So the more we know about these things will allow us to make reasonable adjustments to timetable expectations, to sensory needs, to whether or not the child needs to be in the classroom or actually in a different area for a second, really just focusing in on the power of regulation there. And there are some really cool classroom considerations which we can put into place to kind of make this easy for you guys. The sensory audit is the first and foremost place to start. So in evaluating the sensory setup in your classroom, we'll first be able to kind of acknowledge some really key areas that might need to be changed or just might need to be aware of in terms of it might be a trigger for the child. So in addition to evaluating the sensory setup, there are some really quick and easy strategies that can be put in place with minimal budget and setup time. These include, first and foremost, a food and snack bag. Often I kind of encourage to ask parents to bring this in. You know, we've got budgets and stuff for food for things like break snacks. So we've got little snacks available, but actually some children might need access to more food or actually a different type of food. I worked with one child and things like cucumber and carrots were just not enough after a meltdown kind of situation. So actually we spoke to his mum and we started bringing in cheese, because cheese was just a lot more, it was a bit easier to kind of chew. We had a lot more kind of protein base from it. It wasn't just sugar from fruit. So we found that to be a really good approach. Work with your child, work with the parents around your child as well, to make sure that they have access to food that is healthy for them, but available to them when they need it to help regulate those senses. Next is a personal safe space. Many forms this can take, whether it is under a table, using a kind of a tent or like teepee area, making some blanket space. It doesn't have to be a completely enclosed area, but it is nice for that, just because a mainstream setting can be so unbelievably overwhelming. Just the bodies in the room alone is going to be overwhelming. So anything with walls, just to kind of give that child a bit of space, will be really helpful. Now, this is generally used to help prevent or cope with overwhelming moments. So we're not going to be doing just sitting in here talking. We're not going to be doing work in here. It's really for us to model that regulation skill to the child. So if we can tell that there's a bit of maybe some emotions bubbling up, we take them to their personal safe space, tell them that we're here to calm down, and then as soon as we've noticed that there is a smooth, a kind of more calm down regulation state, then we'll return back to the workstation as quickly as possible. Next, we've got sensory bags. This can be a nice easy one, just to introduce a bag with sensory objects such as stress balls, fidget toys, objects from home maybe, objects from nature, any sensory items that the pupil can use to manage and regulate their experiences in the classroom. Again, this bag is best to offer as a preventative measure and an early prevention tactic, not in the midst of a meltdown. And lastly, sensory breaks really should be integrated consistently into daily routines. Now, even if they're not showing signs of any emotional difficulty, still integrate these sensory breaks into your daily routine. These could involve sensory circuits, which we've got lovely lovely resources to support. However, these could just be, especially for children in Key Stage 2, there could be sports activities or maybe colouring activities, anything to take the child away and give them a little bit of free space. And it's really integral for the body to move, basically. There is a huge amount of hypertonia and hypotonia associated with autism, which means that if we're sat still for kind of too long, bodies can go rigid, and it's very, very uncomfortable. So just to be able to encourage that movement throughout the day will just help to regulate not only the senses, but also the cognitive function. And yeah, that is our first section. Next, we have got pitching work appropriately. So once we've acknowledged some of the sensory difficulties, once we've put some things in place to try and appease and ease some of those sensory difficulties, we can now focus on what work we are pitching to the child. So hands up again, please, if you've heard of zone of proximal development. Again, a super common and, yes, excellent, a super popular one in education. In fact, a lot of scaffolding, modelling, a lot of teaching is basically based around this development theory. So this was developed in 1978, believe it or not, by Russian psychologist Lev Vygotsky. And this theory outlines zones that relate to a learner's actual and potential development, that sweet spot being the potential development that we all want to aim for. However, we've got many different zones to think about. So the comfort zone is this inactive learning phase where no learning is being recalled or engaged. That zone is of little interest to us, I suppose. Actual development is then what the learner can already do completely independently. So this might change for a child with autism or a child with sensory needs. This actual development actually might look different on day to day based on those sensory needs. Potential development is our sweet spot zone, which is where the learner can do a task or an activity, but only with support from either an adult, peer, or external resource. And beyond that zone is considered to be more kind of future development, that this is what a learner cannot do yet, even with support from an adult, peer, or external resource. And the important thing with non-verbal pupils, it's a real balancing act in terms of it's really crucial to strike the right balance between work that is challenging yet attainable. It's going to be more complex to kind of find that sweet spot, and sometimes, like I say, because of the sensory needs, that actual development might actually be shifting from day to day depending on their emotional state. So there's some challenges and implications that come from incorrectly pitching work. So this really will motivate us to stay on track and to try and find the perfect work to pitch to our children, our pupils in school. Some of the challenges include unsuitable curriculum documents or frameworks, that we might find that some of the mainstream frameworks and curriculums are not suitable, have not got any learning objectives that are suitable for our pupils. We could be using lower years of the curriculum, and that's absolutely fine, but we do need to also address the fact that a lot of the academic curriculum, unless we're using early years things, they're not going to be having some of the additional development areas of development that we need to integrate into that child's learning. So what we want to do is find a real suitable curriculum that runs alongside the mainstream curriculum, but that is targeting other areas of development as alongside the academic development. This is really key to getting that right, and it's quite tricky because there are a lot of things out there, and because there are so many differences within the needs in one school, it can be tricky to know which way to go. So we'll talk about that next. Next, we've got limited means of actually evidencing what work is completed and the performance related to that work. So this is why it's really important and key to use written observations, pictures, video, even videos of the child picking up and holding things could really go a long way in terms of fine motor skill progress and things like that. If we're not able to capture evidence, then it really just feeds into not being able to accurately pitch the next step for that child or that pupil. And then lastly, often if we continue to incorrectly pitch work to a pupil, especially one that has non-verbal abilities, so they'll have lots of language skills but just not the communication needs to express them, it can result in a real decline in confidence. Just the fact that the pupil's either being asked or expected to do things that are constantly too hard, or maybe they're given things that are too easy and not at all challenging enough. So some of the implications, if we leave these things unchecked, it can damage the relationship between the support staff and the pupil themselves. It will decline the pupil's confidence in terms of engaging with learning activities, and it will ultimately decline in the support staff confidence as well, because our self-efficacy of trying to achieve something with the pupil, will be affected if we're not pitching it right. And it's not our fault at all. It's just, unfortunately, the tools sometimes aren't fit for purpose when we're in a mainstream setting supporting these pupils. So the correct pitching of work, it is a process. It's not going to happen overnight. It is very much something which the whole team needs to be included in, as well as, we've got Senko and leadership, but we also need the TAs and teachers to be included in this as well. I mean, as much as we can, it'd be great if the kids were included, but it can be tricky in terms of the non-verbal kind of element there. So choosing a framework, that's going to have to be done in terms of just first looking at all the needs in your school. If this is done by the Senko, that is absolutely fine, but this could be done in conjunction with other team members as well. So isolating all the needs that you've got in your school, this could be learning styles, as well as different needs, as well as actual ability of academic ability. There are several different examples of things that we could use as a framework. So the engagement model, which I think replaced P scales not long ago, or maybe, no, that's the pre-key stage standard that replaced P scales, sorry. And those two are commonly used in SEN settings, and the engagement model is more of a kind of sensory, lesser academic focus, and then the pre-key stage standards pathway, that is much more of an academic kind of focus, really trying to plug the gap between the first primary key stage. And then there are SEN EYFS assessment documents, which again have been linked, I think, in this lovely chat as well. All of those things will have elements that are going to be more suitable for supporting pupils with non-verbal, who are non-verbal, as opposed to trying to stick with the national curriculum. I do always encourage these things to be used alongside each other, especially if there are topics and themes that you can pull from the national curriculum. Get the child included in classroom activities, but just with the slight angle of maybe an engagement model learning objective. Once we've chosen a framework and we're happy as a whole team or a whole school that will work for one or multiple pupils, we've now got to then assess the pupils and give a baseline kind of assessment. So this will probably be done as a whole team again, support staff kind of feeding and observations, as well as teachers to help with assessments, really just gauging that first kind of baseline area for the child to start from. And this is just going to help in terms of tracking your progress, tracking your performance, and tracking the pupils' overall outcomes as well. Then I would recommend that either the Senko teachers or TAs get together, but really we want to choose targets that are small. We want to start small and build. This is not only for the pupil, not only to overwhelm the pupil, but for the support staff as well. It's quite tricky to cram quite a lot in. So I would recommend between 5 and 10 targets for a whole half term. So this could be something that we start in small batches, could cover different areas as well of those curriculums. But what we're wanting to do is we want an area, a target that can be done in multiple different activities. So there will be some activities that are okay to be repeated exactly as is, again and again, until the child is able, because actually that familiarity, knowing what to expect, that will really be helping the child in terms of accessing and expecting and reducing anxiety. But what's really important as well is that we repeat these activities in different contexts and different applications, so the child can use the skill across different contexts. So now, planning, preparing and delivering the activities. This again is probably best to be done with the TA and the teacher together. Once the Senko's given the targets, then we can kind of go from there, use targets to then prepare the tasks that we can, that are achievable for the pupil, whilst able to challenge and build skills, maybe even achieve mastery by doing it across multiple contexts. And really reinforces learning, and it really makes I think it's key to make the best of the opportunities of engaging with the mainstream curriculum as well, and being able to infuse kind of alternative framework with the national curriculum will be that sweet spot there, I think. And then lastly, reviewing the progress, probably best to do each half term. If you've got some type of kind of software that you're able to do that a bit easier, then that will help with, because actually with the reviewing, the observations that you make and the choices in terms of how you observe and monitor the progress, this is going to be really integral in terms of reviewing it. So there might not be much to review, but that's okay at first. Build those skills of constantly observing and monitoring. I always try and think of it as education in general as a social science. So we probably more focus on the social side because the job includes just being with people all the time. But really, we are scientists, and this is really trying to get us to tap into that science brain and take those observations and make it into an experiment. Okay, I can see this change here. Let's explore that further. Next, we have reducing barriers to communication. So once we've addressed the sensory needs, and now we're pitching work appropriately, we might find that there are difficulties then in communication in terms of how we then track the responses to the work. So raise your hand this time if you're familiar with the communication noise theory. It is not a learning theory, more of a more of a development. Well, I think it's actually an IT theory. It started in, but I'll take us through a little summary. American mathematician and engineer Claude Shannon teamed up with American scientist Warren Weaver to create the model of communication theory. This sets out a generic kind of process for all communication to go through. This process starts with the sender. You can see on the left, this guy can be the sender. And the sender first generates the message in their head, or generates the message and kind of uses a medium to send it, sends the message, then the receiver receives the message and then internalizes it or understands it, basically. And what in subsequent years, a result of subsequent research, this noise, communication noise theory emerged from identifying different barriers that could come at any part of that communication process. And these barriers are called noise because it simply distorts the message, whether it blocks it completely or just distorts it. So physical noise is things like loud sounds, poor lighting, maybe other environmental factors like planes going past, traffic, or the perfect one for a school environment is when you're in a hall and you've got the echo kind of going on. That's physical noise, and it very much does get in the way of being able to interpret the message being sent. Next, we've got physiological noise, which rings a bell to what we've just been speaking about the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. These includes things like physical discomfort, illness, fatigue, hunger. Things like that are literally noisy in our head because we can't focus on other things, especially for a child with sensory needs and autism. That inability, or rather that difficulty to regulate those internal sensations is going to be causing a real problem in terms of just turning off that physiological noise. So that's why really it's imperative to address that. Next, we've got psychological noise. This is things like preconceived notions about either ourselves or the world. It could be biases, beliefs about oneself or others, and including internal emotional states as well. So this is interesting. The rigid thinking that sometimes comes along with autism can sometimes impact this. And actually, especially if we go back to pitching work appropriately, if we've damaged the trust between the kind of support staff and pupil, sometimes that psychological noise might get in the way, especially if it's around esteem and things like that. And then finally, what we're focusing on for this section mainly is semantic noise. This really speaks to anything that is to do with language, words, or symbols. And it's particularly pertinent when supporting non-verbal needs in any setting, I think, actually. So, enhancing communication. Using symbols and visual tools to support communication and language creates a hugely inclusive environment, not just for non-verbal pupils, but also for a range of pupils, especially with some of the difficulties that are kind of coming up in lower years at the moment with EAL children. It's really just a useful tool for everybody. So I can't express I can't promote this enough, really. Visual timetables are a really great place to start, and these are being adopted in early years classrooms just as a standard, sometimes in Key Stage 1 classrooms as well. Now, the important thing to remember with some of these tools, visual timetables are our voice. This is the teacher's voice of authority, kind of dictating, not in a harsh way because it's not coming out of our mouths. We've got something to refer back to as a prompt, which kind of takes away the pressure from us, really. But it is an authoritative tool, I suppose. It is, we're telling them, it's our voice. The now and next board is more kind of a combination, I would say. I would choose the now, sometimes the child would choose the next. So there's more of a negotiation there. And the AAC, which is kind of augmentative alternative communication, this could be picture cards, communication boards. This is an array of different things, but all those tools is the child's voice and the child's voice only. So they're the key differences, but I'll talk through these things. Visual timetables are probably the first place to start, I would say, in terms of if your child's not used things like picture cards or symbols before, starting with the visual timetable is great. It's really helpful to show the passage of time throughout the day. This builds routine, familiarity, and expectation in the child, which massively reduces anxiety. A lot of, there's something called intolerance ambiguity. Ambiguity, I think it's called ambiguity intolerance rather, and it basically means the fear of the unknown. And actually that is very common in all people with autism, actually, but specifically in a school setting, it can be really difficult if you're young and haven't got a concept of how much time is passing. It can be really difficult to stay in a situation that you don't know how long you're in it for, but you know you just got to stay there. So by giving some visual cues to say, but we've gotten all this way already, kind of thing, it's really helpful. The way that we use this and model this is going to be the make or break of it. So there's different kind of levels of engagement in terms of how the pupil's going to engage. I would also recommend that if it's a pupil that's not used one of these timetables before, just start with an AM or PM. So it could just be from registration to lunch and then lunch to home, or even registration to break and then break to lunch, lunch to home. Very easy to change them around, but we're really wanting to show key enthusiasm at first. It's got to come from us at first, unfortunately. It can be a bit disheartening at first if the child's not engaged, but that is okay. These are the stages of engagement. So initially the child will be uninterested, most likely. They might not know what the pictures correlate to. They might not know that what is on there is going to happen in real life. It might just be an abstract tool at first. So what we have to do is physically show them that, okay, we point to registration, we point to letter formation, we do the thing. Once it's finished, we use a Makaton sign to say finished, and then I would take the card off either the wall or whatever the timetable is stuck to, physically remove it or turn it the other way so we can't see it anymore. There has to be something physical to mark the end of that activity. And then over time, the child will kind of get to grips with the fact that, okay, what's happening on there is happening in real life. I remember working with a child it was in an early years class, but it was a year 1 student, and the early years lead was very, didn't believe that it was working at all. And the child initially would just push it away. It was not interested at all in the pictures or the fact that I was saying it's time for this. And one day he came in and he went and moved. He sat down, looked at it, and put lunch first. And that was my first thing of like, he's never even interacted with it before, but he actually got it, that what's on here, what's on the timetable happens in real life. Okay, I want lunch now, I'm putting it there. So the next stage of engagement is most likely they'll seek to edit it. So once they get that, okay, what's on here is going to happen, they might be very motivated to change it to home, change it to lunch, change it to snack, whatever it might be. This is where the authority kind of comes back in. We do have to engage with some consistent kind of use of this, so we'll have to move the things back. you can use the now and next board. This is a really good place to use a now and next board. So if the child had come into school and said, you know, scooters straight away, chose the scooters, I would take that off the timetable because it's not his choice to make. I'd put letter formation on the now. I'd show him that it was time for phonics, for example, and then put letter formation on the now and next board. His scooter will go next. So any way that we can integrate that child's wants and desires, it's just going to help in terms of the motivators. But yeah, seeking to edit is actually a sign that it's working and it's getting a lot more. So definitely it's something to promote there. And it was just interesting because the head of early years did not see that. She thought that it wasn't working. And then lastly, the child will be asking by pointing to see what's next and following the timetable, taking things off as and when they need to. We'll speak briefly about AAC. Mainly the picture cards, symbol cards, and communication boards. The main thing with all of these is the motivators. So get to know the child. What do they like? What do they want more of? And especially with some of what I've seen sometimes, we start with too many options for the child. And actually, just from a cognitive point of view, we've got to make sure that we start small and build up, get the interaction and the response kind of built in first, and then build on those. There are a couple of communication interventions that you can specifically look into. Intensive interaction is fantastic. These do require training normally, or at least a bit of kind of knowledge beforehand. But intensive interaction is based on mimicking the child in terms of body movement, noise, everything, to try and build. And actually, it works fantastically. I remember doing this within about 2 seconds of copying a child's movement and sound. They were looking at me and giving me eye contact straight away, and then building on my noises, and it was lovely. It very much works, especially for youngest pupils that are still playing, that's still very much hands-on. Music interaction, still suitable very much so for non-verbal children, but can be used all the way up the school for verbal children as well, often used for SALT and actually social emotional kind of skills as well. This often encourages children to take turns in terms of responding to different elements of the songs. Our last section is all about supporting staff wellbeing. So raise your hand. In fact, I know people have heard this, but please raise your hand if you've heard of growth mindset before. This, again, is a common one in the classroom. And it's interesting because I think we do definitely use this with our children. We promote this time and time again in the classroom. But we're thinking now in terms of how we can use this for ourselves. I'll first give us a quick summary. So developed by psychologist Carol Dweck, first published in 2006, the growth mindset theory highlights the influences of one's own beliefs about their abilities on motivation and motivation. So this actually ties into the psychological noise from the communication theory. And it really is interesting that, yeah, limiting beliefs on ourselves or on others or whatever, it will very much impact our motivation and our behavior. So this theory really taps into that nicely. So a fixed mindset will often be where individuals believe their abilities and intelligence are static, cannot be changed or improved, and they may avoid challenges completely and think things like, I'm stupid, or I can't do this, or I hate getting things wrong. Whereas a growth mindset individual might see their abilities as more malleable. So that means they can be grown and developed through effort and continued learning, which is a huge motivator in itself. They are more likely to embrace challenges and persist through setbacks, thinking things like, oh, I'm learning. I can't do it yet. Mistakes help me learn. So like I said before, practitioners are really actively, constantly encouraging pupils to foster this type of mindset. We're encouraging resilience, a willingness to learn, kind of not avoiding failures, and all with a dedication to improve. However, it can be really difficult to apply this to our own practice in schools, especially when we're supporting pupils with high-level needs and challenging behaviour. So some of the tips that we have to support staff wellbeing is collaborative working, first of all. So unfortunately, sometimes in a one-to-one role, it can feel a bit isolated and lonely. because of some of the challenges that we've discussed previously, the child might not be able to be included in whole class learning all the time. This can be really difficult for not only the child but for yourselves as a practitioner. So I think the first thing, and what we've done in a couple of schools that I've been able to kind of work with, is just really knowledge is power, giving all of the school the details in terms of how difficult certain things are for the child, and just building that knowledge in terms of what you are having to do in your roles is really, really important. So the first thing that I would recommend is the fact that teachers get to know the kind of children and the routines more of the one-to-one. I've recommended that one school offers to give breaks a bit more to their one-to-one TAs. So recently I've noticed one of the class teacher relieved the TA to say, no, go have half an hour, I've got this kind of thing. And it was just lovely, because there is a great deal of emotional and physical stress and associated with one-to-one roles specifically, that if you've not been in that role before, you won't know how difficult it is. And actually there might be some of you that have not been in this role before, kind of just, I realise it's autumn one, so there might be people that are kind of feeling like that themselves. But so we can often split. In fact, yeah, there's different schools will have different approaches to this. So largely we don't often have one child working with one staff member all the time forever. That can happen, and it does happen still. It's not recommended. It's definitely not recommended, just in terms of for the staff member, but also for the pupil. If that pupil is going to be moving up school, they need to build relationships with different staff members, and there is a risk of attachment sometimes when they have gotten used to just that one staff member. So as best we can, we promote collaborative working. And then plan B to Z. So I taught in teaching that you've got to plan for possibilities, and that's definitely true when supporting non-verbal pupils in mainstream settings. Knowledge is definitely power in this profession, and learning new skills and strategies really helps to equip us, and it gives us an arsenal of tools to be able to pull out at any time and respond to those unavoidably challenging days. If we introduce measures to protect staff well-being as well, such as taking breaks after challenging incidents. So if there's ever a physical altercation or like some type of physically challenging kind of behaviour where maybe the child's had to be restrained, or even the staff member has been injured or hurt, even if they're not injured badly, if they've just been hurt at all, it's really recommended that they're able to take a 5, 10, 15-minute break, even if it's just to sit in the staff room for a bit, have a cup of tea, sit down, eat a bit of food maybe. Remember all of those things that we were talking about, the sensory side as well. You've got those senses as well, so make sure we're keeping on top of our own regulation in the setting, just so that we can best respond to those things when they come along. So I do recommend that Senkos and TAs work together to make like a action plan type of thing. So if you've got children that you know there's going to be some difficult moments at some point, just put something in place that you know what to do when that does happen. It doesn't have to be set in stone. All of these things are going to have to be flexible to some degree, but knowing that some measure is there will just help a lot, basically. And then lastly, one of the most important things really is that little wins matter. So understanding the curriculum frameworks and things like that, understanding the knowledge of things to look out for in terms of positive feedback, in terms of what the child is showing is that they can do. These small wins do actually accumulate quite a lot, but it's only once we've tuned into being able to read the child that we can really, that we can really that we can really translate into substantial leaps and bounds of progress. So it's definitely important to note that all growth and development comes in waves, not just for non-verbal children. And it's really, really important to allow time for the people to adapt and settle into some of these new approaches and routines before we deem them unfit and we just change them. So sometimes what we've noticed is the fact that children have adverse reactions to just something new. So it could be the fact that, you know, this strategy doesn't work, or this type of thing doesn't work, or it could be the fact that you've just not done it enough times. But because of our own kind of, I guess, psychology. Sometimes if we try something and it doesn't work, we're kind of put off from trying it again. But I do kind of have a general rule of thumb: try it 10 times before you give up. If we had a child that just really didn't like painting, there was nothing about it that seemed like distressing for him, but it just wasn't at all engaged with it, was push it away, and the staff member just didn't want to kind of try it anymore. But I just said, do it for 10 days. So every day for 2 weeks, basically, at school. And by the second week, you didn't have to do it for the whole second week. There was already improvements in terms of just knowing. He knew what to do. He knew the paint was going to be wet, so he wouldn't touch it with his hand. He knew where to put his hand in terms of holding the paintbrush. So it's just really important to not lose faith in yourselves, obviously, and keep trying those things, but also try and stick with it for 10 days at least and see what happens. But yeah, the main thing is just to remember that the little wins do matter, and you guys are doing a fantastic job just by coming to something like this. That's amazing. The fact that you're wanting to improve that knowledge goes a long way, definitely. So yeah, just want to say thank you for your time. I realise we have got some time for questions. So I'll pop on and see if we've got any questions for us. Let's have a look.